Hey, Christie.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing awesome. I'm very excited today because we have my friend Chad Harrison on with us.
What's Chad going to talk to us about today?
We're going to talk about managing with the brain in mind.
But at the end of the day, when you strip away some of those extrinsic factors of motivation, they're still left with this intrinsic factor of I'm not fulfilled. And I think that comes from of how we in America have approached work.
It's all about employee engagement. So if you're a sales manager or sales leader in your organization, or if you have aspirations to be a sales manager or sales leader in your organization, this is definitely going to be an episode you want to take notes on. So either listen to it in the car for the first time and then go back and listen to it and take notes, or sit down where you can actually take notes the first time, because we're really going to dive in to some critical elements of employee engagement.
Hi, Christie.
Hi, Jeff.
We're recording now.
The many hours of conversation you and I have had, we've had probably half of them that haven't been recorded.
You know what we should do? We should start a podcast.
You think? Let's call it the why and the buy.
All right. And welcome back to this episode of The Why and the Buy. Christie, I am pumped to be here. Chad is here, and we're going to talk about some heady topics today. Is that too much?
Heady topics, yes. I like it. I like that term. That I've been using that term all week. I love it. So Chad is a very good friend of mine. We are in the middle of coaching certification training together through CTI, or the Coaches Training Institute, and have had lots of opportunity to have these sidebar conversations about how to motivate people, how the brain works. And you're going to love this conversation, Jeff. I know that you and Chad are going to be kindred spirits as well. Chad is owner and principal consultant for Vantage Leadership Solutions. He's got a huge past in leadership development, and I'm excited to have him. He's got more certifications under his belt than anybody I've ever seen. I don't even want to go through and list them all. So,
well, I'm not much of a thinker, Christie, so I don't know.
Oh, I disagree. I think you are as much a thinker as I am. So we're in good company today.
Well, welcome, Chad.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So, Chad, you and I had this conversation at lunch one day, and we couldn't even finish it. They had to shush us before the class started again.
I know.
Because we just wanted to keep on going. And it was this whole concept of the SCARF method of employee engagement. Tell me what this means, why you're passionate about it, how you came across it.
Yeah, it was very funny that day. We were being shooed away, and I felt like I was eating my pizza on the run, which I typically like to sit down and enjoy because, pizza is one of those things. But it was a great conversation. Listen, SCARF came to me about 2009 by the work of Dr. David Rock. And he just became very fascinated in this idea that if we could really understand how the brain works, possibly it could give us insight on what we need to do in order to be better leaders, better managers, and ultimately engage people more in the workplace. And I guess the reason I'm excited about it, Christie, is because, having 20-something years now in corporate America, it seems like that many leaders and employees, for that matter, kind of view their work as transactional. I come in, I do my job, I make the sale, I answer the call, and then I'm done, and I get some type of compensation for it. And I think we kind of just totally overlook the whole concept of what it means to look at work through social and relational points of view. And that's the reason I'm passionate about it, because I find a lot of insights in that, and I find people really respond to that, and it gives them a different perspective.
It's really interesting to think about it that way, too. To me, it's intuitive. I think to Christie, that's intuitive. But I've noticed those same people. Well, I just make a sale, and then I'm out. I get paid once a month, every couple of weeks. What? It's a job. I just show up every day and do my job, and it's so cut and dry. Yet, when you think about how you have to move people, literally sales and marketing is about getting people to change what they're doing. How do you not do that? Or I'm sorry, how can you do that without relating to them in some way? If everything were black and white, you would have 100% of the marketplace, because according to you, it's everything's black and white. There's a reason you work where you work and sell what you sell and do what you do. Unfortunately, there's people who don't buy your product and they're still right. That's weird. How does anybody get along in this business without at least a modicum of empathy?
Yeah, what I find about it too, Jeff, is many people don't understand that when they go and they do their work, many of them are looking for some type of satisfaction, right? So at the end of the day, they make the sale, but that sale is never good enough. And that could be motivated by the desire to make more money. But at the end of the day, when you strip away some of those extrinsic factors of motivation, they're still left with this intrinsic factor of I'm not fulfilled. And I think that comes from of how we in America have approached work. And that is very transactional in nature. And ultimately, I think that leaves us, Jeff, with just an empty hole inside that we're trying to fill with more activity, which by itself is transactional in nature.
Wow. Do we only have 30 minutes today?
We may have to split this one up. I told you.
Well, I think that's really interesting when you go about it. Okay, great. It's transactional. It's I've got a job. I did my job. I get compensated, and then I go live my life. Yet you really have to have a level of commitment in doing what we do in order to be good at it. And so if you can take it from just a cold, really, for lack of a better term, putting it in, or putting it that way is rather cold. When you just think about I'm in, I'm out, I'm done. There's really needs to be some level of personal satisfaction, of intrinsic satisfaction, of a job well done. And that job well done is not just scored or marked by the sales stack that goes out every week to see who's selling the most or whatnot. I can remember, and there were people who looked at me like I was crazy, but it's probably been 8 or 9 years now. I first started with a company, was really excited to be on board, just came out swinging, and probably 6 months in, I got just a handwritten note, a small handwritten note from the VP of sales with a $20 Starbucks card in it. It said, Jeff, great job, hitting your number. I see what you're doing. Signed from the VP of sales. And I knew he wrote it. I mean, it was in his handwriting, everything. It wasn't something that was just kind of passed along. That note was on my bulletin board way longer than the Starbucks card lasted, because we all know those don't go very far. That kind of thing, I would talk to people about how that meant more to me than anything. And people would look at me like, do you know how much money you made in commission making those sales and hitting that number? I said, well, yeah, but I cashed those checks. I got a handwritten note. I got someone's attention. Someone recognized and validated me for the effort I was putting in, not just the results that I was getting. I just think if you can recognize that, it just goes so far. And you need to be able to recognize that in your customers too, because nobody else is.
Yeah, what you're saying, Jeff, really does speak to this idea of fairness in the acronym of SCARF that was mentioned earlier. And it really does mean that, when we approach something in our life, whether it be our work or whether it be the sale or whether it be even our family, your children, we are all, I think, preconditioned with this idea of if unfairness or a sense of unfairness is generated, we have a strong response to that, even primarily in our limbic system. And it stirs up a lot of hostility, and it stirs up a lot of mistrust. And at the end of the day, we can only serve fairness, the desire for fairness in people, if in fact we can show them a sense of transparency, much like your leader did. I was transparently, honestly, and sincerely thanking you for something that you did, which, by the way, was your job, and you got
right.
But it was more important that I sent this note to you, and that was the thing that made the memory and this event in your life the most memorable. So it's important that we take those times and understand these factors so that we know how to get the most out of our employees. And like you said, I looked at that note for a while, and I'm sure it kept you engaged for a while.
Yeah, so I want to go back to this concept of SCARF, and that's SCARF, right?
Correct.
And let's define what that means for people who might not have heard that. So, Chad, I'm going to let you explain the acronym.
Yeah, so before I explain the acronym, I think the setup here is really important to really understand how we got to this idea of SCARF, or how David Rock did. really all of us, I think, approach life, and because of how we're designed and how we are really social beings in nature, we are constantly monitoring the environment around us, and we're responding to two primary things: the threat or the reward of that environment or those people around us. And so because of that, we are constantly monitoring the factors that make us either want to be drawn into or those factors that push us away. And what was very interesting about Dr. David Rock's work is through a lot of research of other neuroscientists, they begin to study that those individuals that indicated that they had the highest forms of engagement, they noticed certain parts of their brain were actually being triggered when they were doing MRI scans on them. And it was really interesting. Those that were being triggered by threats had the same exact areas in their brains light up as physical pain did. So the point that makes is that when we get disengaged, when we feel like there's a threat out there, even from an animal instinct, almost primal point of view, we have a way of responding to that to push it away, because ultimately it's self-preservation. And so what Dr. Rock figured out was that when he studied this science, he figured out that if we can trigger 5 areas of the brain to light up in a more positive way, that is a response to reward versus threat, then we can actually drive our employees' behaviors and ultimately be more beneficial and satisfactory in their work that they do. So that leads us now to this discovery of SCARF. And to your point, the first one has everything to do with status, being the first one. Look, we live our life today full of status symbols, whether it's the clothes that we wear, the house that we buy, the car that we drive, even the jobs that we have or aspire to have. All of them are an effort to demonstrate that we are arriving, or more importantly, that we are on the same playing field as other individuals out there. And what he was noticing about this is that people who do this comparison, and we all do it favorably or unfavorably to each other, if they feel like that they are favorably compared, then what happens is they will more likely move forward with the comments they need to say, take the action that they need to take. In short, the behavior scientists with me would call it execute discretionary effort more than other people. This is why people that have a strong sense of confidence also have a strong sense of status, but also probably perform more because they're putting themselves out there because they have the confidence back to do it.
Yeah, I want to stop you on that because I really think that's an area that we want to hone in on. And Jeff, you and I talked, I can't remember if this was actually on an episode or maybe this was on the side of an episode, but we talked the other day about this concept of playing small. And a lot of it has to do with what you are comparing yourself to. So it's all relative, right? So we can have status, like in high school, for example. We all know those that were, big person on campus, if you will, in high school or college, right? And that status symbol became almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So it was like the more you were seen that way, the more you acted that way. And then by turn, the more you were seen that way. The same thing happens, and Jeff and I see it a lot of times, even in the speaking field as well, where it's, you just takes a little bit of success and a little bit of exposure in comparison to people who are in your mind successful. And all of a sudden your status gets elevated and your confidence just goes through the roof. And so there's no playing small for you.
It's really interesting too. As we're talking about status, there was a conversation that I was probably eavesdropping on that I heard either on the radio or on a podcast, or I was reading something on LinkedIn. But it was this kind of really an esoteric conversation like this about status and what that really is. And it's not necessarily just the car; it's how you perceive yourself to be stacked against other people.
Yes.
And we're always trying to trade it. And, trying to elevate ourselves. And is this thing that we're about to do going to elevate our status, or is it going to put us down a notch? And I mean, going back to high school, we can even go back to childhood, further than high school, although it's certainly amplified. I mean, we all deal with young kids on a regular basis, right? So we know all about this stuff. I have an 8-year-old daughter, for crying out loud. I'm living this every day. But what's interesting is one of my favorite sports talk radio hosts, a guy by the name of Colin Cowherd, and used to be on ESPN. He's on Fox now. And he's got this theory He's a really smart guy, kind of contrarian. I may or may not. That kind of thing may or may not resonate with me. But he's like, why are most quarterbacks good looking? Because when they're younger, they're told that they're good looking. They're told that they're handsome. They go out and they have the confidence to perform. And at a young age, and you can even go back to Malcolm Gladwell, why are most hockey players born at the beginning of the year? Because when your age brackets and your leagues are divided by year, someone who is born in January is put in the same team as someone who's born in December. But when you're 9 years old, that's an enormous difference in terms of age and physical ability. Then what happens is, because for one advantage or another, kids who perform better get more resources, get better coaching, have more confidence, and that whole concept of status is just amplified. And so now, why is the high school quarterback the team captain and dating the head cheerleader and most popular and prom king and all those things? They are, in essence, self-fulfilling because of all of that information, that data, and that juju that's being fed to them from the time those kids are 3 years old. And it's the same thing with the head cheerleader concept, right? I mean, it's, oh, you're the prettiest, and oh, you're the sweetest, and you're the most fun. And it's very often that the head cheerleader is also a great student for the same reason. There's a lot of parallels there because confidence begets confidence. And there's so many episodes to be done there. But I think what's really interesting to me is how subjective it is. And when you can say that the brain fires up when it's in physical pain, the same way when it's in perceived pain. And then, I mean, you think about PTSD and you think about so many other emotional scars and things like that. Who are we to say that that shouldn't hurt? Because when my 6-year-old son perceives something that is going to be very, very painful, to him, it's as real as it gets. I know better. But to him, it's as real as it gets. Or it's the 18-month-old who's playing outside, walking around, playing outside in the summertime for the first time. They fall, they scrape their knee on the sidewalk, and it's bleeding. They have zero perspective to know that it's going to get better. So they scream bloody murder because they're going to bleed to death in their own head, right? We know better, and with perspective and with the experience, you gain perspective. But it's vital, I think, to understanding and again, empathizing with the people you're working with, that their perspective matters. Their point of view matters. You may have a different experience, but to them, whatever they're experiencing is very real, and it is something to be dealt with, or at the very least acknowledged.
Yeah, you said a lot there, Jeff. That was right on, and I think what really stirs my passion, kind of going back to the earlier part of this call, was that in organizations, we don't do ourselves any favors. And the reason why is we don't teach people how to think about this. And more importantly, we're victims of it as leaders and managers ourselves. And so, and we do things organizationally that we don't understand the impact it has on these concepts. An example, we create threat responses all the time to people's statuses when we do things like performance reviews, or when we do things like a 360-degree review that's meant for development that wasn't properly set up for, or just saying, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And the experience with that person is every time you talk to them, they give you something negative to talk about. Then, we do that all the time. And so my desire is to awaken leaders to this concept that you have to be intentional. You have to understand this information, but you have to be intentional in how you choose to apply it so that you can really get the most discretionary effort out of your employees, which ultimately is all about driving the bottom line in the performance.
Discretionary effort is my new favorite term. Can we get that? Can we get that hashtag trending, please? Can our listeners out there?
We're going to hashtag discretionary effort. I love that. All right, so I want to very quickly for our audience, I want to define the acronym. So it's status.
Yeah, status. Certainty is the next one, and then after that is autonomy. The next one is relatedness. And the last one is fairness.
Okay. Gotcha. So we talked a lot about status. What's going to be interesting, and I want to make sure that we give ourselves some time at the end of this to provide maybe some pointers for our sales leaders, because when you go through this, you have there's an awful lot of information and an awful lot of pitfalls that you can run into as a leader unknowingly, right? I mean, you can really just muck things up with the best of intentions. So I do want to make sure that we have a way to kind of give them a couple of pointers on how to think about this concept when they are managing their own employees. Because when I think about perspective and status, some of these things are also things that we have no control over. We don't even know. Like, I have no idea what your perspective might be because I didn't live your life. You're seeing the life through your own lens, right? So those things are huge for managers, and probably one of the reasons why we kind of do it wrong most of the time.
Yeah, it is, and I think therein lies another good tip, and that is the intentionality that I mentioned earlier. If you're armed with this awareness, then it's the action upon that awareness that's really going to make it impactful. And so we have to really stop. And so if we don't know someone's perspective, we should stop and ask them. I think it was Carl Jung, when he was developing Myers-Briggs, talked about that behavior is actually a result of the thinking processes internally. Well, how can I interpret a behavior accurately by what I see if I don't stop to understand the thinking process behind it? So it's important that we do that so that we understand where people come from, what's important to them. And we know that, I think, generally as managers. But what I think we don't realize is the impact that we have on it ourselves as leaders. One of the phrases I love to use when I'm doing coaching training, I'm training others to coach, or leadership development, is, the best leaders are keen observers of the impact of their own behavior on others. And I think when you can get to that point as leadership, that really defines how you can be very intentional about, I'm going to attempt to do this, but success or failure of what I'm doing really goes through the observation of how that person responds to it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're consistent and with that behavior over time, people also tend to assume you mean the best.
Absolutely. That's
right.
called predictive trust, because they can.
Predicted. See, look at all these hashtags. I'm loving this. Predictive trust.
Man. Discretionary effort. Discretionary effort, I promise, is directly related to predictive trust. And that's in the certainty. And then when you can predict, I'm sensing a pattern here. We've got status, certainty, and then autonomy. If I can predict the way that you are going to react to my actions, I can then decide if I want to take further actions autonomously. Am I getting too far ahead of myself there, Chad?
Yes, that's actually a good lead way. The other part of that, too, of autonomy is that all humans perceive a threat response when they feel like that they don't have control over their situation. I mean, you think about it. Whenever something really bad or tragic in our life happens, what do? When we look to actually control that event in our life. So we consume the information. So if it's an illness that you contract, how many people go to the internet to learn about that illness? Because it's our desire to have control over our circumstances, right? That also goes back to certainty as well. But it's all about the human really needs to be able to understand, how can I manage the situation that I am, and do I have the freedom to do so? And if I don't, like in many workplaces, then that feels very threatening to me, and we classify it and we call it micromanagement today.
Christie, this is going so well, but I don't think there's any way we're going to squeeze all of this information into one episode. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I think that it's definitely a 2-episode piece, and we don't want to cut any of this short. This is such an incredible conversation. I think we stop it here and stay tuned for next week for part 2.
So, when you know your whys, your hows and your whats get much better, and I know why you need to come back next week, because the rest of this interview is not something you want to miss. We'll talk to you next week. Hey, thanks for listening to us on the Why and the Buy podcast. If you like us, tell us. Send us a message at the Why and the Buy on Twitter, or leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you got this podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Talk to you next week. How about the music on this podcast? We call them our house band, they call themselves Haskins, and they're based out of Plymouth, Michigan. If you want to hear more from them, go to haskinsmusic.com and check them out.
By the time you read this, I'll be somewhere far away.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.